Hope that the disembodied voice isn't throwing you. We're going to get started soon, so if you have friends that you're texting from the hallways, text them to come on in. And
More people. All right, so I'll start. I'm gonna.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Debra Newman Kamin. Yeah, treasurer. You'll notice the giddiest and happiest person in the convention is Phil Scheim, who's no longer treasurer, so I don't know what that means for me. Just pay your dues so I don't have to call you. That's all I ask. Anyways, you have Micah Goodman's bio. I don't know how many people can say that they have bestsellers, 2 bestsellers in Israel. One is a book on Guide for the Perplexed, and another is The Dream of the Kuzari. So that's a pretty incredible thing to make a bestsellers list for. And Guide for the Perplexed is coming out in English. Is that what you just told me? Very soon. So hopefully we can make it a bestseller here in the States as well. So Micah Goodman is a research fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute. He has his doctorate in Jewish thought from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and directs Ein Prat, the Academy for Leadership. But I want to speak really personally for just a moment about Micah. I had the incredible privilege, along with several of the people here, of just graduating RLI 4 at the Hartman Institute. And probably the person that we spent the most time with was Micah, both in person in Israel and on webinars over the computer. It was an incredible, incredible privilege to study with you. Your intellect, your warmth, your humor, shown in everything that you did. The joy that you had from teaching American rabbis. Not everybody loves to teach us. Let's just be honest about that. We can be a tough crowd. You enjoyed teaching us, and we so enjoyed learning from you. And got a lot of high holiday sermon material, I have to just tell you. It was not only inspiring, but practical also. Your love of the text, your enjoyment that you got to teach us Kaplan and Heschel and people that it was chutzpah, but it was fun. It was fun, and also appreciated. But then several of us also had the privilege of traveling with you to Ein Prat. And the joy and love and excitement that we had from studying with you as rabbis who already came knowing that we loved these texts, we got to see that same joy and excitement from the young secular Israelis and the religious Israelis that are mostly finished with their army service, and many of them engaging in these texts for the very first time and falling in love with them through Micah and his teaching and his inspiration and what you've created there. So whoever you are, whatever age you are, whatever your Jewish background is, there's something tremendous and wonderful to be gained by spending time with Micah Goodman. So it is my incredible privilege to welcome you here with us today. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you for that. It's true. I think first of all, it's an honor to be here, and it's fun to be here, and it's great to be here. And that's right. Teaching RLI, teaching American rabbis, is my favorite thing in the world, besides teaching Israelis. But my relationship with American Jewry is a complicated relationship. My mom was born and raised in a Roman Catholic family in Oklahoma City. And she comes from what we call a Haredi Roman Catholic family. My mom's uncle still is what we call my gruncle Jack. He used to be the personal advisor to the Pope, to John Paul. It turns out that the Pope has an advisor on davening. 13 years he used to advise the Pope what to think about when he prays. So he used to do research to try to this is before Google, to figure out where there are problems in the world and where should the Pope focus his attentions on. I have another uncle, my Uncle Bill, which was a priest, and another cousin, my cousin Amy, which became a nun, and another cousin, which is a charismatic preacher in Oklahoma City. I come from a very frum Roman Catholic family. And I'm sharing this when my mom is about 20. She rebels against everything that moves. And that includes everything, including religion. And she's very idealistic. She goes to volunteer for the Peace Corps. And obviously, who do you meet in the Peace Corps? A nice Jewish boy from Springfield, Massachusetts. And they volunteer together in Bolivia, and they fall in love, and she decides they want to get married. They send an email or a pigeon or whatever it was those days to Oklahoma, and the Catholic family couldn't accept because they're against intermarriage. They couldn't accept it. So they bring the frum uncle all the way from Rome to La Paz, Bolivia, to convince my mom not to marry my dad. There was no conversion in the cards at that moment, but there was an idea that she shouldn't marry a Jew. My dad's a charming person. When I say charming, I mean literally. He casts a charm on people that he meets, and he somehow charmed the Pope guy from the Vatican. He somehow charmed him, and he stayed there. The family joke is he was their Misadil Kiddushi. He stayed there. So they get married. Now here's the situation. The uncle from the Vatican accepted the marriage. The family from Oklahoma did a cherem. They didn't accept they didn't accept the marriage. They stopped talking to my mom, to my dad. The family myth is that 2 years later, after her parents are not talking to her because she marries a Jew, she says, you know what? What the hell? She starts learning Judaism, converts to Judaism. They come to Israel. By 1970, my older sister, Debra, is born. And once there are grandchildren, the grandparents break. And then they start coming to Israel. When I'm born in 1974, so my grandmother is living in our house like 2 months a year. And we go every year to Oklahoma. That's why I felt very comfortable here in Dallas. We go every year to Oklahoma, to the farm, where they had a farm, and it was beautiful. And I thought that every Orthodox Israeli has a grandmother that speaks to Jesus. I thought this was normal. And I remember the contrast between my Oklahoma family and my Jerusalemite friends and everything. I remember once we were in the airport in Ben Gurion, and it was everybody were very standing in line. They were very Israeli. And we get to Oklahoma, and everybody is smiling and generous and nice. And they were so sweet and so holy. And I remember I was about 6 or 7 years old, and my father tells me, Micah, you see all those people? They are all goyim. That was a family secret. They're all goyim. So I was still learning language, so I figured the word goy means a very nice person. So, this is true. So I decided that when I grow up, one day, I'm going to be a goy. Now, this is all true. I'm just saying. Now, I remember being a teenager in Jerusalem. I remember the contrast between my parents are so American, and my friends were so Israeli. And I always felt like my parents were too American, too loud, too cheery, too, American. And my tough Israeli friends. And I felt like I didn't belong. So I did everything I could to belong to my Israeli Orthodox friends. So the Christian secret, I hid. The American piece, I tried to hide. I did everything I can to be as Orthodox as I could be. And I used to speak English like this. I was Israeli. I don't know English. Those people don't know. I remember my parents came to basic training, cheering, and I was like, But about, so, about, I don't know, I can't remember how many years ago, 6, 7 years ago, I realized that my American background is not something I want to turn my back to, it's something I want to embrace, but also like my Catholic background, in some deep, mysterious way, is part of who I am. And what happened to me through Machon Hartman is that Hartman gave me an opportunity to speak to North American Jews. So I started learning, again, about North American Jews, and reading about America, and reading American philosophy, and polishing my English, and gaining my American accent again. I feel like I've been investing the past 7 years in faking an American accent. So coming here to this important conference is very exciting for me. It's very exciting for me. It's very important for me. We all know that the Jewish world is not a global world anymore. We all know that Jews aren't all over the world, and we all know that the Jews are located in 81% of them in 2 places, in North America and in Israel. And the future of the Jewish world depends on the future of the relationship between North American Jews and Israeli Jews, and it's not an easy relationship. I never feel comfortable speaking to North American Jews because I only fake it. I don't really get North American Judaism. So what I'll try to do today, learning Torah with you, I'll try to share an Israeli reflection. And I hope we'll come out of this lecture with some Torah, but also with a reflection on exciting, not trivial things spiritually that are happening in Israel today. The way I like to do this, I like to study 2 texts. One from Masechet Tmura, a second text from Brachot, and a third text from Life about Israel today. And I guess between every part of this lecture, so I'll open it for some questions. I'll close it very quickly so we can move on. Okay, is that a fair deal? Okay, so I'd like to start with a comment made by David Ben-Gurion. David Ben-Gurion is not in the text here. David Ben-Gurion said that Zionism is a different kind of a revolution. It's different than the French Revolution and the British Revolution, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, the Russian Revolution. Because all those revolutions of people rebelling against a foreign ruler, a dictator that ruled over them, that robbed them from their liberty. Zionism is different, because Zionism is not only an attempt of the Jews to rebel against a foreign ruler, it's an attempt of the Jews to rebel against themselves. It's a revolution of the Jews against themselves. What he meant was that Zionism is an attempt of Jews to rebel against their collective personality as it was cultivated in the Galut. This is where a great thinker like Micah Yosef Berdichevsky comes in, saying that Zionism is not only a political revolution, trying to create a state that didn't exist. It's also a therapeutic revolution, trying to create a Jew that doesn't exist. As Jabotinsky put it so harshly, Geza psychologi chadash shel Yehudim. Can you imagine that? A new psychological breed of Jews. It was an attempt to create not only a new state, but also a new Jew. And the essence of this new Jew, according to some of them, like Berdichevsky and Brenner, was that a fearless Jew. The way they analyzed Galut is about carrying a double fear all the time, where fear is injected into your personality. It's because you constantly fear the Goy, and the power of the Goy, and the authority of the Goy. But as Berdichevsky puts it, Jews don't only fear the Goy, they also fear God. They believe that God, the creator of the world, revealed himself to the world, and the revelation was recorded in sacred texts. And the masters of those texts could tell you what to do. So you're constantly under 2 authorities. The authority of the European nation states, but also the authority of halacha and their rabbis. And since Zionism is about liberation, it's ultimately about double liberation. It's about liberating Jews from the control of the Gentiles, but it's also about liberating Jews from the control, as Berdichevsky said it, of their past. captures this in one line, אנחנו דור אחרון של יהודים. He says Berdichevsky, דור אחרון של יהודים. ודור ראשון של עברים. We're the last generation of Judaism and the first generation of Ivrim, but later turned into Israelim. I like to think about this double revolution, especially the second part. Zionism attempted to create an Israeli that's not only liberated from the Goy, but liberated from his past. That part of the revolution is a part that we have to deal with, and it's my belief that Israelis are finally dealing with that part of the revolution as we're talking. And since the issue is authority, I'd like to study now a text, a Talmudic text, that deals with authority. It's a beautiful text. Masechet Tmura. It's in page 6. The Hebrew is in page 6, the English translation. Where? It's in page 5. Yeah. So if it's okay, I'll read this in Hebrew, and if you feel more comfortable, still follow me in the translation. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda is a Amora, second generation, very interesting rabbi. He studied both in Sura, the great yeshiva of Rav, and in Nehar De'ah, the great yeshiva in Shmuel. And this is a text that could only be written by a person that is born from two different schools, the disciple of two different rabbis, of Rav and Shmuel, of Sura and Nehar De'ah. And after that, he created his own yeshiva. After Shmuel dies, he creates his own yeshiva, Pumbedita. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. So Rav Yehuda is carrying the tradition of his Rosh Yeshiva, Shmuel. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. 3,000 הלכות נשתכחו בימי אבלו של משה. Describing an intellectual tragedy that happens once Moshe dies. The death of Moshe is not only a personal tragedy, the death of a leader, it's also an intellectual tragedy. It's in a deep sense the death of the Torah. When Noten HaTorah dies, the Torah itself faded away. 3,000 הלכות נשתכחו בימי אבלו של משה. Spooky. אמרו לו ליהושע, שאל. The people ask Yehoshua, Sh'al. What does Sh'al mean? Get it back. Ask God to give us the Torah that was lost when the giver of the Torah, can you say that in English? The giver of the Torah, does that make sense? Noten Torah, is that translation? The giver of the Torah dies. Amar lei lo b'shamayim. These three words from Dvarim, so much quoted from Baba Metzia, from Tanuro Shel Achnai, Rabbi Yoshua. It's quoted here by Rav Yehuda. Amar lo b'shamayim. We can't ask anymore. Once the Torah was given, can't be given again. There is no second Torah. There might be a polemic here also. Amru lo leShmuel Sh'al. A few generations later, they asked Shmuel HaNavi, maybe you could bring the lost Torah back to the world. In the imagination of Rav Yehuda, in the name of Shmuel, the Torah was lost all throughout those generations. אמר להם, אלה המצוות שאין הנביא רשאי לחדש דבר מעתה. Prophets are not allowed to bring halacha to the world. The only, Rambam says, the only prophet that could create laws is Moshe Rabbeinu. From that moment on, prophets can quote laws. They can't create them. אמר רבי יצחק נפחא, אף חטאת שמתו בעליה נשתכחה בימי אבלו של משה. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha has a very important, he had something very important. that among those 3,000 halachot, it was important for him to mention that one of them is din chatat shemetu ba'aleh. It was a very, until he said that, we couldn't understand the sugya, but now we get it. It was very important to add that among all the halachot that were lost, one of them is din chatat, when you have a korban chatat, that the owner of the chatat dies in the process of, it's a sugya and zvachim that's quoted in Masechet Yomah, around Yom Kippurim, and the classic biblical story of chatat shemetu ba'aleh is obviously Nadav v'Avihu, that die in the process of chatat. So Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, אף חטאת שמתו בעליה נשתכחה בימי אבלו של משה. Enough, that's one of the 3,000 halachot. It's important for Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha to make that comment. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha means we also know what his job was. He was a napach, meaning, what? A blacksmith, that's right. Yeah. He didn't know that he's supposed to make a living from Torah. אמרו לפנחס שאל, אמר אלו בשמיים. They're going now from the prophetic tradition to the priestly tradition. אמרו לרבי אלעזר, לאלעזר שאל, אמר לי, אלה המצוות שאין נביא רשאי לחדש דבר מעתה. End of the tradition. The Torah was lost and it couldn't have been reconstructed by prophets or priests. אמר רב יהודה, אמר רב. Now Rav Yehuda, the same Rav Yehuda, is going to bring an alternative tradition, this time not from Nehar De'ah, but from Surah. Not Shmuel, but from Rav. This sugiyah is clearly of generations, not because of the Sneh Boer, not because of Brit Ben Abetarim. Why? According to this radical imagination of Rav Yehuda, why did we start that war? To restore the lost leadership of Joshua. It was the Kevin Spacey show, House of Cards. I thought it was an Israeli TV show. By the way, it's interesting that Rav Yehuda imagines Kibush Haaretz as a part, he imagines it as a cynical move by Joshua to restore his lost leadership. Yahweh doesn't really think that. In Haggadah, in Haggadot, Chazal allow their imagination to go wild. But still it's interesting because Rav Yehuda is the anti-Zionist of the Talmud. Rav Yehuda is the one that says, Kol olemi bavel le'eret Yisrael over ba'aseh. He thought it's asur not to have sovereignty over Eretz Yisrael. That's Shlosh HaShavuot. It's asur to go to Eretz Yisrael. Over ba'aseh. When his Talmid, Rabbi Zera, wants to leave Bavel and to Eretz Yisrael, he has to sneak out because he doesn't want to get caught by his rabbi. Maybe, I'm just asking, is it a coincidence? The same rabbi that says you're not allowed to go to Israel is the same rabbi that's cynical about conquering Israel? Just asking. Now there's another tradition. A third one. בבתים נמתנה 1,700 קלים וחמורים וגזירות שבועות ודקדוקי סופרים נשתכחו בימי אבלו של משה. Now there's another tradition trying to say, and I think this is an important part of the tradition, that what was lost wasn't only the knowledge, it was also gzeirot shavot vekal v'chomer, meaning it wasn't only the knowledge, it was the method of lamdanut, of scholarship, of gzeira shava, of kal v'chomer. That's what was lost in Yemei Evlo shel Moshe. Amar Rabbi Abahu. Now we're going next generation of Amoraim. Af al pi chen, hichziran Otniel ben Knaz mitoch pilpulo. All the lost knowledge was gained back by one biblical hero, Otniel ben Knaz. שנאמר, וילכדה אותניאל ben Knaz אחי כלב. I guess we cut it too early. This is a great midrash, crazy midrash. What, according to Sefer Shoftim, what city did Otniel ben Knaz conquer? Kiryat Sefer. So there's a midrash here. He conquered the book. This is a classic Talmudic move. In Sefer Shoftim, it was a military move. He conquered Kiryat Sefer. In the imagination of the rabbis, it was a spiritual move. He conquered back the Sefer. By the way, Kiryat Sefer today is a city filled with, it's a Haredi city. I think it's back to be Kiryat Sefer. This sugya, an important sugya, is a great sugya that expresses the halachic mindset, the Talmudic mindset, the great movement from revelation to interpretation. When they couldn't restore the knowledge through prophecy or through revelation, the only way they could restore it is not asking God anymore, but turning to their own minds, to their own intellect. They're becoming their own authority. Af al pi chen, to interpretation. Af al pi chen, hichziran Otniel ben Knaz mitoch pilpulo. I like to think a little bit more. Maybe there's more here. Maybe it's more than just af al pi chen. I want to offer one thought about the referring here to Nadav ve'Avihu and Chatat shemetu be'aleha. Why does Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, in the middle of the sugya, have to intervene with that bizarre remark that among the 3,000 halachot that were lost after the tragedy of the death of Moshe, one of them is din Chatat shemetu be'aleha? I'd like to offer a thought here. Maybe this is one of those lines of the Talmud that you have no idea why it's said and what is it doing here. And there must be a girsa where it's not. But maybe it's here for a reason. Maybe that remote, bizarre line is the key to the secret of this sugya. Chatat shemetu be'alea nishtakcha bi'imei v'lo shel Moshe. And I'd like to zoom in to the story in the Torah where there's a chatat shemetu be'alea, the story we all know too well. Tekes Chanukat HaMishkan. I'd like to move to the next page. What we have here is the peak. We don't have a lot of time, so we're going to read the peak of this ceremony. In the 8th day, in the moment which according to Chazal is Yom Kippurim. That's why it's dealt with in not only in Zvachim, but also in Yoma. This was after the second collective revelation. Am Yisrael in the desert didn't have only one collective revelation in Sinai. It had a second collective revelation in Chanukat HaMishkan, when God appeared and the people of Israel reacted to God's second appearance, where it says, Vayaronu vayiplu al pnehem. Here, Rudolf Otto had a great comment. Vayaronu vayiplu al pnehem. Vayaronu is milshon Rina. Kol Rina v'Yeshua. Rina is joy, and vayiplu al pnehem is what? Fear, terror, says Otto, in great religious moments. Paradoxical emotions appear. Joy and fear and terror at the same time. Vayaronu vayiplu al pnehem. So we have God appearing, the people reacting religiously and paradoxically. And then there's Nadav v'Avihu that want more. ויקחו בני אהרון נדב ואביהו איש מחתתו ויתו בין אש וישימו עליה קטורת ויקריב לפני אדוני אש זרה אשר לא ציווה אותם. ותצא אש לפני אדוני ותאכל אותם וימותו לפני אדוני. In the Pesukim we didn't bring here, the ash came out and ate the evarim that were on the Mizbeach. It seems like the same ash is coming out now, this time not to swallow the evarim, but the makrivim, but the priests, two of the priests that bought those evarim. ואומר משה לאהרון, הוא אשר דיבר אדוני לאמור בקרובי הקדש ועל פני כל העם יכבד, וידום אהרון. ויקרא משה אל מישאל ולצפן ולעוזיאל דוד אהרון, ויאמר עליהם קרבו שאו את אחיכם את פני הקודש אל מחוץ למחנה, ויקרבו ויישאו בקטנותם אל מחוץ למחנה כאשר דיבר משה. ויאמר משה אהרון ואלעזר ואיתמר בניו, ראשיכם אל תפרעו בידיכם אל תפרומו ולא תמותו, ועל כל העדה יקצוף. There's a lot to be said here on the anticlimax. After collective revelation, we have a tragedy. It's a very, very biblical narrative. The narrative as opposed to Hollywood movies, the Bible never ends a story in a high, on the peak. After Sinai, there is an Egel. And after the people of Israel say in Har HaKarmel to Eliyahu and Navi, Hashem hu Elohim, Hashem hu Elohim, the next day, they go back to worship the Baal V'Asherah. And after this moment, after the great collective revelation, after Tekes Chanukat HaMishkan, after God radiates to everyone that He's present and they react with Vayaronu vayiplu al pnehem, we have this terrible moment. So after climax, there's anticlimax, and the second paradox here, then the most holiest place, Bekodesh HaKodashim, we have now Avi Avot HaTum'ah. Why did they die? It seems like they died because they didn't go by protocol. It seems like they died because according to protocol, they weren't supposed to bring their own individual Esh Zara. Maybe this is against religious spontaneity. It's against not going by, violating protocol. When you're in the Mikdash, there's laws, there's rules, you have to follow them. There's no room for individualism. There's no room for religious spontaneity. There's only a protocol that you have to follow. And then there is the heroic moment. Vayidom Aharon. And Moshe telling them that they can't express any expressions of what? Of grief. Why can't they? Why can't they? For the same reason that they died, you can't change the ceremony and express any sadness about them dying. They died because you have to obey the ritual, and you can't express avelut. Why? Because you have to continue obeying the same ritual. There is no room for anything spontaneous here. The show must go on. Now these lines, I don't know how they're used by sermons here in the U.S. But the Vayidom Aharon sermon is a classic Israeli sermon in Erev Yom HaZikaron. It's a classic Israeli sermon, meaning at great moments, you don't have personal grief, only collective grief. In great moments, you have to swallow your own individual pain and realize that you're not your own person, you belong to a group that's bigger than you, to the people of Israel. Vayidom Aharon. And I think there's also something even more powerful in this pasuk. When God tells them not to express any individual pain, He says to them, Ve'achichem kol Beit Yisrael ivku et esrifa shesaraf Hashem. Now you representatives of the collective, you can only be attached to the pain of the collective, but your own personal pain, as I mean a psychological trade-off, your personal pain will be expressed by the collective. And the collective pain or issues you'll experience personally. There's a psychological trade-off here, and I don't think you have to be too sensitive to listen to what he's saying here. To Elazar v'Itamar, to the younger brothers. He's saying to them, Ve'achichem kol Beit Yisrael ivku tesrifa shesaraf Hashem. He's saying to them, your brothers are Am Yisrael. You have no personal brothers. Nadav v'Avihu are not your brothers. Ve'achichem kol Beit Yisrael. At this moment, at this ritual, you are priests. You're a priest, you're not a father. You're priests, you're not brothers. You're people of the collective. You're not individual human beings, and therefore you don't have the privilege for individual pain. So they asked to overcome themselves. Vayidom Aharon. By the way, is this material also for sermons here in America? Or you don't have Yom HaZikaron? But there's only one problem with that sermon. I think it's textually wrong. If we continue to read how it goes on, we'll move to, I'm speeding it up, I'm moving to page 8. Part of the process is that there is a Seir Chatat, and part of the process of the Korban Chatat is, as you know, Korban Chatat is not Kodashim Kalim, it's Kodshei Kodashim, meaning it's one of those Korbanot that the Kohanim have to eat. And Chazal say that the eating of the Kohanim is an essential part of the Kapara. Be'achilatam kaparatam, it's a part of the Kapara. And now they're supposed to, part of the ritual is them eating the Korban Chatat. But there's a problem with this Korban Chatat. What happened with it? Nadav v'Avihu just died. Now here's a moment. I'm skipping to Pasuk Tetzayin. Are you with me? V'tzira Chatat darosh darash Moshe. Moshe asks the two brothers and their father, where's the Chatat? Vehinei soraf. They burnt it. ויקצוף על אלעזר ועל איתמר בני אהרון נותרים לאמור, מדוע לא אכלתם את החטאת במקום הקודש? כי קודש קודשים היא, ואותם נתן לכם לשאת את עוון העדה לכפר עליכם לפני אדוני. ואין לו בית דמי אל הקודש פנימה, אכול תאכלו אותו בקודש, כאשר ציוויתי. Why is Moshe very angry? In the middle of this great ceremony, he becomes very angry. Why is he angry? For the second time in the same ceremony, they violated protocol. They didn't eat korban chatat. I assume that he's terrified that what will happen now? Yeah, we just gotta. We weren't obedient. They don't know what to say to Moshe, but their father does. Vaydaber Aharon el Moshe. By the way, why didn't Moshe turn to Aaron to begin with? Why does he turn to his sons? Also, Aaron didn't eat the korban chatat. I don't know why, but something that's easier when you have to yell at someone. You have to yell at the kids. So Aaron comes up, V'amar Aaron el Moshe, and he actually has an answer. And he's going to tell them why they violated protocol and why, against what he commanded, they didn't eat the korban chatat. וידבר אהרון אל משה, הן היום הקריבו את חטאתם ואת עולתם לפני אדוני, ותקראנה אותי כאלה. Something did happen today, if you didn't notice, my brother. ותקראנה אותי כאלה, ואכלתי חטאת היום? You think that after everything that happened, I could start eating meat now? Now, I don't know why he thinks, what's the psychological link between Nadav and Avihu dying and it's clear to him that he can't eat meat? Is it because when you're depressed you can't eat? Is it because he can't eat burnt flesh? He can't imagine himself eating korban chatat now. The show can't go on. Something had to change. Can't you realize that? But that's not how he's expressing it. He's expressing it a little differently. He says to him, Hayitav beinei Adonai. He's saying, do you think that's what God would want? Hayitav beinei Adonai? Is that what God would want? And the unbelievable ending of this parasha, Vayishma Moshe, Vayitav beinav. Aaron is speculating, saying, I don't think this is what God wants. Hayitav beinei Adonai. In Moshe's answering, he's persuaded by his brother, but it's a different persuasion. He's not persuaded that God wants that. He realizes that that's what he wants. Vayishma Moshe vayitav be'einav, his own eyes. This is a very unbiblical moment. I'll try to explain why. There are at least 4 other parallel moments where there's a halacha that they didn't know the answer. Bnos Lofchad, Mekoshesh Etzim, Mekalel, Pesach Sheni. These are all 4 precedents when something happens and they don't know what to do. What are you supposed to do with a Mekoshesh? What are you supposed to do with someone who curses God? It doesn't say in the revelation in Sinai wasn't complete. It didn't cover all the details. Pesach Sheni, somebody couldn't do Pesach. So in all these precedents, what does Moshe do? In Bnot Lofchad, so what does Moshe do? He goes to God. He asks God. God tells them, and he knows the answer. Meaning, in all these precedents, we need another revelation to complete the first revelation. To fill in the missing hole in the first revelation. Now there's another, again, now every time, by the way, they have to go into Ohel Moed, ask God, they get an answer, he comes back. God is the only posek in the Bible. Besides, this is the only time where he is not. Paradoxically. In this case, they didn't have to go to Ohel Moed to ask God because They're already there. He can just turn his head and say, what are we supposed to do here? But at this moment, the only moment in the Torah, they decided not to ask God. They decided to ask themselves. Maybe this is exactly what Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nafcha meant. Af chatat shemetu be'alea nishtakcha b'yimei avlo shel Moshe. What we forgot in those tragedy of Yemei Avlo shel Moshe is not that the Torah was lost. It's that the sense of human autonomy was lost. Is that when you don't know something, you don't ask God anymore. This is a Talmudic moment inside the Bible. It's a Tanuah shel Achnai moment inside the Bible. And it's a tremendous paradoxic moment. Because in the middle of that story, where the Psukim are saying, you're not an individual, Aaron comes out and he says, I am an individual. In the middle of that story, where the punishment is saying, the show can't go on, Aaron is saying, the show must go on, Aaron is saying, but it can't. And at that moment where he expresses individual grief and individual pain, at that moment where he expresses his individuality, saying that the ceremony, the ritual can't capture and erase my individuality, that's the same moment where he expresses intellectual autonomy. It's about asking myself. By the way, this is V'tzir chatat darosh darash Moshe. This is obviously not pshuto shel mikra, what I'm saying now. But this is the only place in the Torah where we have a midrash. Where people are deciding to ask themselves, maybe that's what Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha is adding to this sugya. When Moshe died, that wasn't a moment where we were supposed to express our dependence on Moshe. That was the moment where we were supposed to release ourselves from the independence on Moshe. It was supposed to be a chatat shemetu be'aleha moment. That what was forgotten in Yemei Avlo shel Moshe. This text, it's a rare text. The Shas 63 Masechtaot doesn't only have these kind of sugiyot. The Talmud is filled with authority, but there's some moments where the scholars of the Talmud are reflecting what is it that they are doing. What is the Torah about? Is it about authority or autonomy? What happened in that moment when we moved from revelation to interpretation? Maybe the Nadav Avihu story is a moment of interpretation in the middle of the text of Revelation. And in that sense, I feel this text is an important text. And I'd like to use this text in the Israeli context in a minute, but this would be a good time just to stop for a short round of questions. What's the time now? Almost 11:30. Okay, great. Anyone wants? Please.
We have a half an hour left, so please, everybody, keep that in mind.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just offer a slight twist to what you said, because this is, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha is pointing this out at the moment in which Moshe dies. And what Moshe did here was agree to Aharon. Mm-hmm. So it isn't about Aharon's human autonomy. It's about having a leader of a generation who's willing to tell you how to navigate the law and to understand that you don't only have a written text. That is, Moshe here is understanding that even his written text isn't complete, and you have to navigate the written text. And what Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha is saying is, we have nobody in our generation who knows anymore how to navigate this system.
I'll move
Continue.
on. Okay, so we'll take.
This way? Yeah. Just one footnote. This is not the only midrash in the Torah. Michael Fishbane wrote a book back in 1984 in which he describes a whole series of midrashim of later straits of the strata of the Torah from earlier strata of the Torah. So there are a lot of different midrashim in the Torah.
Inside the Chamesh Chumshei Torah
Yes.
of Moshe
Yes.
Rabbeinu doing a midrash?
Yes. Where the later strata, in Deuteronomy in particular, interpret the earlier strata. It's a book he wrote in 1984. I don't remember the name of it. I know exactly where it is on my
Thank you.
shelf, but that's okay.
Thank you for the photo.
Just to pick up on the previous comment, actually, Aharon here is the posek. And just, I'd like you to comment that Moshe is affirming it, but Aharon makes the decision for himself and explains it to Moshe, and Moshe accepts it. So Aharon normally doesn't appear in Torah as a posek.
This text, it was supposed to be a text that preaches obedience. And right at the end, it turns around saying that we're supposed to be obedient and we're supposed to obey the law, but there's certain radical moments that don't fit into any law. And those are moments of human autonomy. This paradoxic moment of planted in this sukkah by Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, bought by Rav Yuda, the disciple of two different schools, of Sura Neharda, of Rav and Shmuel, bringing two different traditions. He was a person that lived in a tension between traditions. I like to think a little bit more about living in a tension between traditions, and I kind of lost the sense of time. So I guess I'll talk very quickly. I'd like very quickly to offer a comparison between, we're speaking about interpretation and revelation, Torah shebichtav, Torah shebe'al peh. I want to think about the beginning moment of the Torah shebichtav and compare it to the opening moment of the Torah shebe'al peh. Beginnings are very important, as we know. It creates the first impression that defines the rest of the impressions. And the opening moment of the Torah, shebichtav, we all know, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. A dramatic opening of the Torah. It's hard to hear the drama because we read it so many times, but if you try to erase your memory like Descartes said that a great student is a person that manages to forget everything every day. And if we could forget everything and listen to these psukim from the very beginning, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. And since we don't have time, I just want to point out one thing. It seems like the world, before the world, there was a lot of water. There was this premodal ocean that was terrifyingly dark. V'choshech al pnei tehom. And this dark ocean, it's a terrifying picture, is now attacked by God. Vayomer Elohim yehi or, vayor. And now God separates. Vayavdel Elohim. He separates between the or and the choshech. Vaikra Elohim laor yom. Velachoshech kara laida. Those are the three acts of God. He creates light, He separates, and He calls it in names. Vayavdel Elohim, vayikra Elohim laor yom, velachoshech kara laida. Then there's a second day where He takes that ancient ocean and He splits it in two. Vayirakia betoch hamayim, v'yimavdil ben mayim lemayim. That's why the sky is blue. Why is the sky blue? Because we're living beneath an ocean. And by the way, it's also very terrifying to live. We don't have to go to Tel Aviv to see the ocean. I'm a Jerusalemite, so you have to go because you're living beneath an ocean. And there's obviously the fear that we live beneath an ocean, that what will happen one day, the sky will literally collapse, and that happened once in the Mabul. And when you live beneath an ocean, and the myth is that if you sin, it will collapse. Maybe that's what you call Yirat Shamayim. Now, when you have this awareness that God puts light and He separates from the darkness, and He puts the rakia and He separates between the mayim and the mayim. By the way, what is Pesach about? Kriyat Yam Suf. The entire world was created when God took an ocean and tore it into two. Am Yisrael is born when an ocean is torn into two. Maybe it's like saying God's recruiting the powers of creation to create they come back to create Am Yisrael. I'm getting carried away here. I'm trying, but these are for your sermons. That's obviously a dramatic opening. God being omnipotent, in control of everything. Human beings being standing in front of this God, experiencing their tininess, their weakness. That's the opening statement of the Torah. In the beginning, God created everything. What is the opening statement after that dramatic opening of the Torah Shebe'al Peh? I'd like to read from, we have here in page 3. What's the opening statement of the Torah Shebe'al Peh? Perek Aleph bebrachot, as opposed to Perek Aleph in Bereshit. Meimatai korin et shma be'arvit. That's a dramatic opening. משעה שכהנים נכנסים לאכול בתרומתן, עד סוף השבועה הראשונה דברי רבי אליעזר, וחכמים אומרים עד חצות. That's a dramatic opening. Now, you could say a lot of things here. David Hartman used to say that the Torah Shebichtav starts with a statement, Bereshit bara Elohim. The Torah Shebe'al Peh starts with a question, Meimatai korin shma be'arvit. Torah Shebe'al Peh Bichtav is loud and dramatic. Torah Shebe'al Peh is detailed, is technical. It starts not with a theological statement, but with a machloket. I'd like to listen more to the difference between these openings. It might help us think about the difference between these two worlds that these two texts represent. I'd like to move, because I'm running out of time, to the second Mishnah. After we ask Meimatai korim shma be'arvit, the Mishnah is asking in part 2, Meimatai korim et shma be'shacharit. Now it's really getting interesting. Meimatai korim et shma be'shacharit. Okay. Now they're saying, Mishiyakir ben tchelet lelavan. When is it morning? When is it morning, or enough morning that we could start saying Shema Shacharit? When is it Shacharit? When is it morning? Misha Shiakir ben Tchelet Lavan. As you know, there's different shades. Lavan and Tchelet are pretty similar. And there has to be enough light in the world to differentiate between Tchelet and Lavan, when there's enough light in the world for that. And by the way, it's about when the sun is about 14 degrees beneath the horizon. There is enough sun in the world, enough light in the world to differentiate between Tchelet and Lavan. When I was in the army, so we used to know how many degrees the sun is beneath the horizon, because the question is, like, I was in a unit where we had to hide. So you're supposed to build your hiding place all night, and in the morning you're supposed to, when there's enough light to look at what you built, you're supposed to go into hiding. And when there's enough light to differentiate between shades of green, that was what we did in the army. Here, so we knew the degrees that the sun was beneath the horizon. The Mishnah says when there is enough light in the world to differentiate between Tchelet and Lavan, then it's morning. But then Rabbi Eliezer offers ben Tchelet lekorti, meaning when you can differentiate between white and korti, which is closer to white, then it's morning. Meaning, what does Rabbi Eliezer do to morning? He makes it later, so more light to differentiate between those shades. Now there's another question. Tell when is it morning? When is the window of Shacharit end? Rabbi Eliezer says, Ad heinetz hachama. Your window called morning, called Shacharit, called Zman Kriyat Shema, is from when the sun is like minus 14 degrees from the horizon until heinetz hachama. That's Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Ad shalosh shaot. You know what shalosh shaot are? You take daylight, divide it into 12. Everyone is a shah zmanit. It's not art, shah zmanit. Ad shalosh shaot. Why shalosh shaot? שכן דרך בני מלכים לעמוד בשלוש שעות. בני מלכים, the people that, you know the kind of people that don't have to get up in the morning for a job? So when they wake up, then it's morning. What's the machloket between Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer? Rabbi Eliezer has a cosmic criteria for what morning is. When the sun rises, it's morning. For Rabbi Yoshua, it's not a natural phenomenon. For Rabbi Yoshua, it's not when the sun rises, it's morning. For Rabbi Yoshua, it's when people wake up. Then it's morning. When the last one to wake up wakes up, then it's morning. What's the machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua? And they have this machloket throughout the Talmud in different versions. In this case, in Tanur Shel Achnai, their machloket is, does the text have objective meaning? In Brachot is time objective? For Rabbi Eliezer, it's a natural phenomenon. For Rabbi Yoshua, it's human and social. Let's put it this way. According to Rabbi Eliezer, people wake up in the morning. According to Rabbi Yoshua, when people wake up, it's morning. Do you know the Emek Rephaim scene? I would say, if I was a posek, I'm not a posek, but in the spirit of Rabbi Yoshua, when they stop in Kafit of Emek Rephaim, when they stop giving breakfast, no, I'm serious. You know, according to Rabbi Yoshua is, you know, the Rabbi Yoshua phenomenon would look like this. You know those type of teenagers? Well, I have some friends that are 40 and they're still the same. Myself too, sometimes. You know the people that they wake up like at 11 and they say, good morning. And you're like working since 6 and you're, good morning. According to Rabbi Eliezer, that person is wrong. According to Rabbi Eliezer, if you wake up at 11, you say good morning, you're in the afternoon, buddy. According to Rabbi Yoshua, morning is something that we create. If you're in Tanur Shel Achnai, the meaning of the text, according to Rabbi Yoshua, is something that we create. According to Masechet Rosh Hashanah, the famous Sugiyah, Rabbi Yoshua realizes that Kedushat HaChodesh is something that we create. According to Rabbi Yoshua, morning is something, this time is what we create. Maybe there's a deep connection between Perek Aleph and Bereshit and Perek Aleph and Brachot. Between the opening of the Torah Shebechtav and the opening moment of the Torah Shebe'al Peh. The opening of Torah Shebechtav is about time. Vayikra Elohim la'or yom ve'lachoshech kara layla. Vayavdel Elohim. It's about creating time. And the opening of Brachot is about creating time. There's just one difference. In Torah Shebechtav, God is mavdil ben or lechoshech, ben yom lelayla. And in the opening statement of Torah Shebe'al Peh, it's mi mavdil ben tchelet lekorti, ben tchelet lelevan. It's not God separating day from night. It's human beings distinguishing between day and night. But Rabbi Yoshua takes that one step further. It's not only us noticing that it's morning. It's even more than that. It's not noticing that it's morning. It's we are creating the sense of morning. If the opening statement of the Torah Shebechtav is about God creating the difference between day and night, the opening statement of the Torah Shebe'al Peh is about human beings creating the difference between day and night. And in that sense, the opening impressions of these two textual worlds point out to the theological gulf between them. The Torah is a theocentric text. God is the posek. God creates, God controls, God tears the ocean apart and creates day and creates night. And the Torah Shebe'al Peh is an anthropocentric for the most part. And it seems like human beings are inheriting all the roles of God in the By the way, I think the Talmud noticed the linkage between Mishnah Aleph and Bet and Brachot and Perek Aleph and Bereshit. They ask, why do they start with Me'matai kol mishma be'arvit and then shacharit? Why is it the first night and then day? And the Talmud says, Mi briato shel olam ayteilei. The Talmud understood that there is a linkage. What I try to do here is think about the linkage between Brachot and Bereshit. The moment where God separates day from night, and the halachic moment where Rabbi Yeshua decides, and this is what nifsak le'alacha, that we're the ones who do that from now on. It's our world, our text, our Rosh Chodesh. It's our time also. I want to go back to Rav Yehuda, a disciple of two schools, two rabbis, two traditions. The difference between Perek Aleph and Bereshit and Perek Aleph and Brachot, two different worlds, two different gods, two different human beings. Rabbi Nachman Mibreslev has a drasha on the famous line from Masechet Avot, where it says, Yaakov b'no omer, kol chayai gadalti ben chachamim. Kol chayai gadalti ben chachamim. There's a lot to think about that line. Rabbi Nachman asked the following question. Efo gadalti? Rabbi Nachman asks in a beautiful Hasidic drasha, Kol chayai gadalti ben chachamim. This is a person his entire life is growing. He's asking, where did he grow? And his answer is ben chachamim. In the space that's created between scholars. So Rabbi Nachman asks, what exists always between scholars? When you open the Mishnah, when you open the Gemara, what do you always find in between scholars? There's always a machloket. Rabbi Nachman says, Sham gadalti. You don't grow from a tradition, from a rabbi. The space of growth is the space that's between them. You grow from the machloket. Sham gadalti. Rav Yehuda is a person that grew ben chachamim, between Surah and Nehardea, between Rav and Shmuel. And I'd like to bring Rav Yehuda to this sugya also. When we ask, where can Judaism grow? In the theocentric world of Perek Aleph and Bereshit, or in the anthropocentric world in the Perek Aleph of Brachot? In the world where God is in control, or in a world where we define everything, including time itself? I'd like to listen in light of that question to Rabbi Nachman again. Kol chayai gadalti ben chachamim. These are two different religious intuitions. Two different human sensitivities. And maybe the electricity of the Jewish tradition always was the ability to grow between these two worlds. Kol chayai gadalti ben chachamim. I feel that as an Israeli, this is everything that the revolution called Zionism didn't completely get. That they thought that Judaism was only a world of authority, which created an impossible Israeli scene, where Israelis are playing an all-or-nothing game. There's very, very dominant orthodoxy, which I have a lot of respect for, where Judaism is about authority and being religious is about obeying to that authority. And there is secular Zionism. It's about rebelling against any source of authority. Against the Goy, against God, trying to create a Nietzschean Jew that nothing can control. By the way, they were very, very successful in that. Nothing can control, nothing, no boundaries on Israeliness is about having no boundaries on your behavior, no artificial boundaries, not what the Goy says, as Ben Gurion says, Lo chashuv ma goyim yagidu, chashuv ma Yehudim yasu. That captures Zionism. Not what halacha says. By the way, that includes manners too. I'm serious. That includes manners too. What are manners? Artificial norms trying to create boundaries on our behavior. Creating this Nietzschean duo is Zionism was such a successful revolution. Maybe too successful. creating not only a new state, but also a new body language, a new personality. And playing that all or nothing game, or the world where you completely surrender to the authority of tradition, or the world where you shake off tradition in creating a new liberated Jew, Geza Psychologi Chadash Shel Yehudim. I think our tradition, our power of our tradition, wasn't choosing one world, but was living ben chachamim, in the tension between those worlds. My sense is that young Israelis are starting to get this, that the all or nothing Israeli game, that either you completely surrender to tradition or you reject tradition, that all or nothing Israeli game is starting to end. We see that with new Israeli music. Ehud Banai, Evyatar Banai, Kobi Oz, Eti Ankari, Beri Sakharov, all these singers I'm mentioning now, these are rock stars. They're not avant-gardes challenging mainstream. They are mainstream. They are all going Jewish. It used to be that if you're in Israel and you want to listen to Jewish music, you have to go to the radio to the Hasidic stations, and you hear Yababam. Now you go to Galgalatz, which is what young Israelis listen, and you hear Yonatan Razel and Ehud Banai and Kobi Oz. Judaism became very, very, very popular. And what we sing in Israel, new Batei Midrash, young Israelis, like what we see in the army in Machon Hartman, like what we see with young Israelis in Ein Prat. What we see, you mentioned my books being successful. Thank you. Great compliment. Please buy my books in English. But it's a testimony to something new happening in Israel, because the majority of the people who bought Moreh Nevuchim were secular Israelis. Something is happening, and here's not what's happening. It's not secular Israelis becoming religious. It's secularism changing from a secularism that rejects Judaism to a secularism that's not controlled by the past, like Berdichevsky said, but it's inspired by the past, like the model that Echad Ha'am wanted to offer, that wants to live in the tension between the world that I create and maybe the world that my tradition created for me. And this tension is a tension. I'm not saying that Israel is there yet, but I am saying that Israel is going there, and it could go there, and Israel might be much more interesting than we imagine. Toda.
We have some time for questions, maybe about 7 minutes, so please keep them brief so we can get as many of you as possible.
Hi, I'm Daniel Graber. I want to go back to the passage from Vayikra and its relationship to Tzmurot, and just ask you to focus on one aspect, that moment where Aharon it becomes the posek, as it were, where Moshe listens to what he does. You gave other examples in the Torah where there are questions about what to do, and this isn't just a moment where Aaron acts autonomously, but it's a moment that takes place in the context of death. And all of the sources which you brought take place in the context of mourning over death. And I want to ask you to just reflect, what do you think that particular context of loss says about why this is the transition from God to human autonomy?
First of all, I didn't notice that. I didn't notice that. I only brought death to you today. The death of Moshe, the death of Nadav v'Avihu. So first of all, I have to ask my therapist, why did I do that? Chazal say, Amar Rabbi Bun in the Yerushalmi, that Onan patur min Torah. Why? Lama Onan patur min Torah? Because he's focusing on death. When you focus on death, the Torah doesn't exist anymore. שנאמר, כל ימי חייך, ימי חייך, ימים שאתה עוסק בחיים, לא ימים שאתה עוסק במתים. I don't think that's a good תירוץ to what you asked, but it's an interesting way to think about it. תודה. Yes.
In your presentation, you presented a dialectic between Torah as God's power and Torah Shabbal Peh as human power. But isn't that dialectic in the texts themselves, namely the difference between chapter 1 of Genesis and 2 and 3, and likewise the debate between Yehoshua and Eliezer?
Great, great.
That there's embedded within each of those texts that dialectic.
Great. You know the Chinese model of yin and yang? Opposites can complete each other only if there's a presence of one opposite in the other. You know, in the yin and yang, there's a black spot in the white half, and vice versa, right? So if you think of these texts again, I was saying chapter 1 is theocentric, and chapter 1 in Brachot is anthropocentric, but that's not very accurate. Because what is chapter 1 of Brachot about? It's about Shema Yisrael. It was Shema about Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim. It's about surrendering to God. So the same text that expresses human autonomy, we have autonomy to decide when we lose our autonomy in Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim. And chapter 1 in Bereshit is about God in control. And then in verse 26, 27 comes the second greatest revolution of chapter 1. That human beings are created in the image of God. And if it wasn't for human beings created in the image of God, we couldn't inherit God in Avdil ben Yom and Laila. So I'd say, thank you for your question. Because it's not only the tension between the texts is reflected inside every one of these texts. So done.
Well, first I just want to read you something that maybe if anyone's ever read the book The Hobbit, right? Bilbo says to Gandalf, "Good morning." And Gandalf says, "What do you mean? Do you wish me a good morning? Or mean that it's a good morning whether I want it to be or not? Or you feel good this morning, and that is a morning to be good on?" So if you want that for a sermon or something, it's no. But I have a real question, and I'm not sure you're the right person to ask this, but we've had two Israel scholars come now, you and Dr. Hartman, and my understanding is Machon Shechter, I'm not sure, but my understanding is Machon Shechter on the issue of homosexuality is not where the American Jewish community is. And you've quoted and you and Hartman both have said that when a plea for chesed comes, right, as Aaron did to Moshe, that we need to respond not with process and protocol, but with chesed. How has the Masorti community in Israel, if you're comfortable speaking about that as a member of the community, what is the message for us in terms of Israel's Masorti community's approach to a more... Are you Orthodox? Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know. But I'm just... So let me change the question then. What cases do you see that we need to show more chesed as you've been teaching and we've now been learning about chesed in, Lifnei Reshut Adin?
I just want to say, I don't belong to the Masorti movement, and I don't want to... I had a great conversation today with Rabbi Chayun, and so I'm starting to understand the politics. I just want to say one thing. I think we should learn a lot from Pope Francis. Pope Francis didn't say anything about giving a heter. He didn't deal with homosexuality. He just said that's not where the passion of the church should be today. And I think for me, as an Israeli, trying to create an Israeli conversation about Judaism, it has to be, it shouldn't focus on all the issues that make people despise Judaism. So I'm not a posek, I'm not a rabbi. I do philosophy. I don't know how this goes. But I know that for my students in Ein Prat, there are three issues that create an allergic reaction to Judaism. The relationship of our tradition to a yachas legoy, to people from the Kihila Lahatabit, the LG... what you said? Lahatabit is the Israel. And the relationship of tradition to women. And I know that these are 3 points that are today a great boundary between thousands of young Israelis and Judaism. And that boundary should be crossed for the sake of Judaism. That boundary should be crossed.
Going back to source 3, Tamurah, on Joshua, I'm trying to understand if we're blame is too strong, but we're putting responsibility on Joshua for the new idea of starting a war, as you said.
Okay.
Because it looks like in the text, it's kind of God's idea, right, being spoken.
Yeah.
And so, so where do we understand the narrative of within as already being a polemic versus truly God's word? And then is the critique then on God or on Joshua by the rabbis?
Yes. I think it's less a critique, but it's a humorous remark of Rav Yehuda. And I think he's saying, obviously, it's not Joshua, it's God. Joshua is weak. His leadership is lost after the Torah is lost. And God says, hey, go attack Canaan and your leadership will be restored. I'm pretty sure that if you'd ask Rav Yehuda, do you think that's what really happened? I think he'd probably answer something like, no, but that's not what Midrashei Agadah are about. Midrashei Agadah, this is my understanding of Midrashei Agadah, are not an attempt to elaborate the psukim, to say something about the psukim. They're an attempt to say something using the psukim. As opposed, maybe it's a part of Midrashei Halacha. So he's trying to say something using the psukim and not something about the psukim. I don't think Rav Yehuda wants us to learn chapter 1 in Joshua in light of this Agadah. But maybe he is trying to say something about what he thinks about taking initiative, going to Israel today, the effect of what does it mean to be an intellectual leader versus a military leader. I think he's saying something about that using these psukim. And they were artists in using the psukim to say, well, you're rabbi, so you know this. Yeah, to use some of the psukim to say what you want to say to your community. Okay, this was very packed. We did Tzmura and Brachot and Bereshit and a reflection about Israel. I hope this was helpful. Toda Rabba.
Yasher Koach, keeping with the theme of our conference of Torah and Tachlis, I have some Tachlis announcements. The Doubletree Shuttle